a podcast about amazing people from an incredible state. Amazing Arizonans with Mike Broomhead.
This episode, Amazing Arizonans, we couldn't do it, I don't think, without having him in. It's John Hook from Fox 10. I'm serious.
No, you can certainly do it without me.
No, we've had some. I've had the privilege of talking to some people that I think everybody would want to hear from. We've talked to Ducey, we've talked to Jan Brewer, we're talking to Michael Crow, but I think
you talked to Colangelo.
He's coming up. We haven't talked to him yet.
Okay, I didn't want to let the cat out of the bag.
No, that's fine, but he is one of the ones on the list.
Why do you have me in?
We just talked to Luis Gonzalez.
Again, You made my point.
But I think that you're being too humble. Your years here, I'm going to read, I didn't know this. I'm going to read this. He's won more than a dozen Emmy Awards, a 5-time recipient of the Associated Press Anchor of the Year Award. You have had an illustrious career right here in Arizona, one place. It's pretty amazing.
It's rare.
It is.
I'm really, really fortunate, Mike. I'm really fortunate.
What do you attribute that to? Because you are one of the most recognizable faces in news in Arizona for sure.
I think being in a place you love, which I truly do. I went to school here. I went to ASU. That's what started my love affair with Arizona. That was 1978. And I think it's putting down some roots and staying in a place long enough. If you dig in and do the work, good things will happen. I was not a guy who was always looking for the next jump. I think a lot of people in our business grass is always greener, and I never felt that way.
But you've also created, I think there's an image, I watch you guys all the time, and you've worked with other people, and you do the Saturday show. You have a unique way of working with individuals or working alone, where you make other people feel comfortable, or you make your guests feel very comfortable, and I think that's unique.
I hope so. I love that Saturday show, Newsmaker Saturday.
It's great.
Interviewing is my favorite thing to do, and I know for you it's the same thing.
It is.
You love that. And it's about finding that commonality. I heard you this morning with Attorney General Chris Mays. Ideologically, I'm sure you guys are in some different places, but I love the fact that you've got those two opposing sides generally coming together to have a conversation about what's best for the state.
Right.
That is where we need to be, and we're not right now. And it's really counterproductive.
Isn't it? There's a fine line, though, I think, and you're probably much more experienced at it than I am. There's a fine line where you want to make sure you're asking difficult questions in the sense you want answers, but you don't want to become adversarial because that kills the whole point of the conversation.
I agree. I'm much more, I would say, in the vein of, he's had so many travails, but Charlie Rose would be a style. Tim Russert would be another one. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be adversarial. You can do it with a smile and say, what you're proposing is insane.
Yeah.
Have a laugh about it. And I think that's fine. You don't have to be nasty to get your point across.
I think you're right. And I think there's a way to say to someone, I think that's silly, or I think that's absolutely wrong, without calling that person stupid or silly.
Exactly.
And how do you manage that at a time where we are so politically divided that it seems like that is almost expected? In news now, you're expected to be the bulldog and go after the opposition.
I don't think you get good answers that way. The minute the person you're interviewing is on the defensive and feels like they're being attacked, I don't think that elicits the best responses or information. At that point, they're in fight or flight syndrome, and they start putting up walls.
But do you think...
And it's not necessary.
But what do you think the audience wants? I mean, has there been a shift in what the audience is expecting from the news?
I think the audience now wants some depth. I think this has really been a shift. It explains Joe Rogan's popularity. There is a real appetite for digging below the headlines and getting into the genesis of whatever issue you're talking about. How did we get here? How did this happen? What's the background? You can't do that in a 2-minute news story.
And you also look at the popularity and the shift from Bill Maher, and how critical Bill Maher has been of what has been his side of the aisle for a long time, and he does it with humor.
But I think, for him.
Yeah, that's been so well received that he's actually stood up and said, this, you know where I stand politically, but look, this is insane. And it's been a lot more, that takes a lot of courage in an industry when you're counting on those people to continue to watch you.
Right, exactly. And think of Alan Dershowitz. Dershowitz is trying to speak as a constitutional scholar. He's alienated every liberal friend he's ever had.
I know.
And it's really sad. He's trying to say there are constitutional principles, regardless of ideology, that we've got to uphold. And he's saying, I'm trying to illuminate those, and I'm getting vilified for it.
Yeah, and so let me ask you about some of the people you've talked to. I'm very interested in this. In your career, you have covered so many different things, and I'm going to get specific. But from your perspective, who are some of the people that you've sat down with, that you've had the privilege of interviewing, that just were amazing to you? Who have you talked to?
Oh, man, it probably comes down to musicians, actually.
Okay.
Pardon me. Battling a little something there. Musicians are, because I was a music, I mean, I still am, but I did that in college, and that was a big
I didn't know
part
that.
It was a big part of my life.
What'd you play?
Bass, guitar, and now keyboard. As I've gotten older, I've gotten a vocabulary on the keyboard.
Okay.
But we played clubs all over Phoenix and Scottsdale and Arizona. I was doing that all through college.
I have someone I want you to meet then.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I love it. So I love especially getting into the mind of the musician and how they create what they create, and especially songwriting. Some of that is really, really interesting. Last week I interviewed the woman who wrote Pat Benatar's Love is a Battlefield. Tina Turner's Simply the Best. She's amazing. She's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and to talk to her about that was super cool.
One of the people I would love to speak with, and I've never had the privilege, is I would love to talk to Stevie Nicks.
Oh, yeah.
I just think as far as a singer-songwriter,
and a Valley resident.
Yeah, and someone argue that she's not the best of a generation in both singer-songwriter.
Oh, she's right there.
It's an amazing career of not just how well she sings a song, but the depth of what she writes.
Right, right. I know people who've worked with her. I've got a good friend who worked with her. In fact, he named his daughter Rihanna after the song. And she's just a talent. She's an incredible talent and a really sweet person. I haven't met her, but my friend is a good character witness.
I would, before we get into the career stuff on television and in the news, you wrote the book, Who Killed Bob Crane?
Right.
So for the people that are maybe too young to remember, Bob Crane was the lead actor in Hogan's Heroes. He played Colonel Hogan. We
grew up with it.
Yeah, I love that show growing up. And his image was a little bit different than his lifestyle.
Definitely.
But he was brutally murdered in Scottsdale.
Right.
And that was 1978.
Right.
And you picked it up when, and what motivated you to write that book?
His son, Bob Jr., who wrote the foreword for the book.
I've got that.
He came on Newsmaker Saturday, and I also interviewed him for a separate piece on the news. And we started talking about his dad's case, and I kind of felt like been there, done that. You know, it's been so covered that it really didn't even motivate me to interview him. I wasn't that excited about the interview. But after the interview and seeing a son with all of these profound questions about what happened to his father, I thought it was incredibly unfair that he didn't have answers 40 years later.
What did you discover?
What I discovered is that because how we went about this, and that interview created the energy to push. And I started thinking about that interview after it was over because I felt this sadness from this guy that he didn't really know. And so I started thinking about this whole thing over several days after I'd interviewed him. It just kind of stuck with me. And I started thinking, that trial for John Carpenter, who was accused of the crime and acquitted, that trial happened right around O.J., 1994. He was acquitted. And I started thinking, boy, the DNA evidence in that case, where is that material? And thinking about the leaps and bounds DNA technology has come in 30 years, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to take another bite of the apple with, if it exists, and retest that DNA evidence collected and see if it could give us an answer. So Bill Montgomery, the county attorney at the time, I went to him. I first went to Rick Romley, the former county attorney, who prosecuted the case of Carpenter. I said, Rick, are you sitting down? I've got a crazy idea. And I laid it on him, and there was silence. And I thought I'd offended him, actually. He said, wow. He goes, that's a really good idea. I said, can you help me? He goes, I'll help you in any way I can. I said, where's the evidence? He didn't know. So we had to track the evidence down, first of all. It ended up, it was in the county attorney's office, in an evidence area. I think there was some reluctance on the part of people in the office to open that can of worms. But I went and had a meeting with Bill Montgomery. I told him what I wanted to do. And to Bill's credit, who now sits on the Arizona Supreme Court, Bill said, if you can get answers that we could not, I am all for it. If you can give the family some answers, I'm all for it, even if it's not within a law enforcement capacity. He said, the guy who we put on trial is dead. The case has been adjudicated. If you want to take another stab at it, I will help you do that. So they provided me with the evidence. They packaged it up, sent it to Bodie Selmark. Selmark did John Benet Ramsey, did O.J. Simpson, did the original testing on Bob Crane's DNA in the case. So I was trying to keep it, keep it consistent and go with a really
the reputation, flight. Exactly.
And when I called them, they said, Mr. Hook, we don't have a protocol for a reporter retesting evidence in essentially a cold case. We don't have a protocol for that. You're doing something that's not been done. And I thought, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so the county attorney's office had to sign off on all of this and send the material and package it and send it to Bodie.
Wow.
We paid for it.
Yeah.
But they helped us do it.
Wow. And what did they find?
There was a lot of inconclusive in this DNA for various reasons that are discussed in the book. What I would have expected is the blood that was on the car door of John Carpenter's car that matched Bob Crane's blood type, B positive. That's a very rare blood type. It's only in about 12% of the population. They found B positive blood in John Carpenter's car. Right there, that got investigators on this. So my contention was, if we could actually prove that it's not only type B positive, but it's actually Bob Crane's blood, case closed. Because the jury foreman, who's interviewed in the book, the jury foreman, Michael Lake, he said, he's a former Marine, by the way, by the book guy, he said if we had had DNA that was proof positive, we would have convicted John Carpenter. That was the missing piece of the case. So that was my whole predicate for doing it.
And through that process, was that the first book you'd written?
Yes.
Is it the only book you've written?
So far.
So did you like it? Did you enjoy the process?
Oh, it's a battle. It's a battle. I was waking up in the morning writing, didn't play golf for probably 8 months, gave that up. It was writing, getting the kids to school, get them up, writing, and going to work.
And that's it, just a cycle of that.
Yes.
The reason why I ask is...
And these are hard books to write when you're talking about nonfiction.
Right.
Because everyone will dissect it, they'll review it, they'll poke holes in your assertions if you don't really have it buttoned up.
But from a creativity standpoint, we see you as a journalist. You've got obviously an illustrious career as a journalist. I've learned already that you're a musician. These creative outlets for you, is it just a different way to be creative? Because you have to be in your job. You've obviously mastered this craft as an anchor.
I don't know about that.
Well, okay, let's say if you've
But I'm very comfortable in that.
I was going to say, if this deep into the career, you still have work to do, but you're very good at it. You're very accomplished. The other areas, not so known for.
No.
But is there any less joy in those creative outlets?
Oh, no, there's probably more because you're stretching. You're stretching what you can do. And in the kind of journalism that television journalism does, you're dealing generally with a pretty surface treatment.
But do you still believe that what you do is important for the community? Do you see the importance?
I do. I think people just want it, play it straight. That's all they're asking for.
Well, I was watching yesterday, and I'm kind of putting a timestamp on this podcast, but we had this enormous fire in South Phoenix yesterday. The black smoke could be seen valley-wide, and I turned on to see coverage of it at 4 o'clock, and the team's coverage of this was about as good as you possibly could have done to get people the information of where it was happening, what was happening, houses without power. Do you still see the value and importance in getting that out to the computer?
Definitely.
Because it's an amazing thing, a necessity for people to get the accurate information. You see the smoke in the distance to get the information.
Essentially, that's why we're here. This is why AM radio is so important.
Yeah.
You know, for the emergency response and letting people know what's going on, this is really, really important.
Yeah. And when you look at how the world's changing, how the ways consumers, well, obviously now this podcast is a big part of what we do. Do you like the changes in how people consume things?
I do, because there's more depth. And I think if people are a savvy news consumer, they can get to the truth of what's going on with an issue if they dig. They have to be kind of citizen journalists. And it's incumbent upon us now. The information's all out there. I mean, and this phone is the Library of Congress. We've never had that kind of access to information, and it's created problems because in the era when you and I were growing up, the three networks were predominantly, and the New York Times and Washington Post, were setting the agenda for the country.
Right.
Because there were only those outlets that everybody kind of accessed, there was some commonality in what the agenda was for the day. There was some general agreement of what issues are key, what's important, what are we focusing on. Now we're all over the place,
right? Because
there's so much information coming at us that there are all kinds of agendas.
Was there danger then of you had to rely on the people having the right agenda on what we heard?
Yes. No doubt. We had severe gatekeepers. When you're down to 5 outlets, really, that set the tone for the entire nation, New York Times, Washington Post, CBS, NBC, ABC, maybe USA Today as that became, more popular in the 80s. Wall Street Journal, too. You're down to a handful of gatekeepers for the information that are kind of deciding what the agenda for the country is.
Yeah, and we saw at times, it seemed as if we saw a bit of an agenda poke through the scandal with Dan Rather and George Bush in 2004,
right,
where it seemed to be he was using documents. But overall, there was an era where journalists took it very seriously to just bring the truth to the people and let you decide. Do you think that's changed?
I do.
And so is it a good change, or is it a bad change, or just a change?
Oh, that's a tough one. You've got journalism professors, some at ASU, frankly, my alma mater, who are saying we need to throw out the standard of objectivity, that objectivity is a false equivalency, that giving a side here and a side here sometimes isn't proper because this side is false. Well, who decides?
Right.
Who decides? I still believe that the standard of objectivity and trying to present fairness to both sides is the key. Trying to give each side their ability to express their position and then let the public figure it out, what makes sense to them.
Is that ever challenged? Is that challenging for you at times?
Yes.
To not inject your own?
Of course, always.
How do you offset it?
Well, I remember doing the gubernatorial debate between Fred Duval and Doug Ducey. And I was so concerned about the Fox brand that we would be seen collectively as maybe going easy on Ducey.
Right.
If people perceive that. If there was any push toward Ducey, they'd go, see, there's Fox. They're tipping the scales. They're unbalanced. They're on the right. So frankly, looking at that debate back, I went overboard the other way.
Yeah.
And I've talked to Governor Ducey about that. I think he might have felt that way too. I was so worried about that perception that I think I tipped a little bit the opposite direction. Dan Rather's talked about this exact thing as well.
Yeah.
And I think, again, in the final analysis, we all have our opinions about stuff, and I have very strong opinions about a lot of things. But when I'm in this job, what I try to present is be fair. You park all of that aside. I liken it to a judge in a courtroom. A judge may look at a defendant and internally say, this guy's guilty.
Yeah.
He's guilty.
Yeah.
But that's not the job. The job is to give that guy, the defendant, a fair hearing. Mm-hmm. Give him every opportunity to present his case. We're in a world now where there are people trying to not give particular sides an opportunity to be aired. We're starting to gatekeep. We're starting to silence people whose opinions we may not agree with.
Right.
I think that's dangerous. I think it's anti-American, frankly.
And the way I've talked about it is what happens is when you have somebody that is the arbiter of the truth in leadership, that's fine when it's your side that holds the office. But when you're no longer the gatekeeper and the other side's in charge, does truth all of a sudden change 180 degrees? Yeah, and that's the danger.
This is Orwell, Ministry of Truth.
Yeah.
Coming to fruition. We've got people silencing people and deplatforming people, and we saw it in spades with the censorship industrial complex that Michael Schellenberger wrote about. Matt Taibbi, they exposed this stuff. And these are two liberal guys, by the way. And they don't like what they see. And I applaud them up and down for exposing it.
It's funny, I've talked about, I don't know if you're familiar with the comedian Ricky Gervais.
Yes.
Ricky Gervais and I disagree on almost everything. He is a self-professed, very vocal atheist, but I think he's hysterically funny on stage. And following him on Twitter, he defends the people that hate him and say horrible things to him and defends their right to say the stupid things they say. To me,
that's the First Amendment.
That's a defender of the First Amendment.
This is, and it's been said many times, but the framers, certainly some of the framers talked about it. There are historians who've talked about it, that you defend the speech you hate.
Right.
That's part of the deal.
I talk about burning the American flag. I think it is one of the most egregious things an American can do in the form of a protest is to burn the American flag. As a matter of fact, the late Senator McCain told a story when I asked him about flag burning that when he was in the Hanoi Hilton, one of the guys they were in prison with had sewn an American flag inside his prison uniform. And every night before they would eat dinner, they would get a bowl of soup for dinner. They would all stand. He would open his jacket and they'd say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Wow.
When their captors found that flag, they beat this prisoner almost to death. And they nursed him back to health. And the first thing he did when he was able was sew another flag on the inside of that shirt. That, to me, is an example of why you don't burn the flag. But at the same time, I absolutely defend somebody's right to do it. It's still a First Amendment. The protections are still there.
That's exactly right. You can't have the country that we have without that First Amendment. And you can't. People have to be able to express themselves.
Isn't it a little bit of an insult to the people?
Pardon me.
I think it's insulting to say you can't see this because it's a lie. That as if it is a lie, that you're not smart enough to figure it out.
Well, this is the debate we're having right now. There are people who don't think the public is smart enough to figure it out, so we're going to protect them from that.
Right. Do you think they really are trying to protect people, or do you believe that you marginalize something, you make it dangerous, and then therefore you can stop it from happening?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think it's both. I wouldn't, people who feel strongly about some of these things, I never doubt their sincerity that they believe it strongly.
Me either.
I just personally feel they're wrong, and that I actually put a lot of faith in people. We have conversations all the time about, is the public stupid? I don't think they are.
I don't either.
We couldn't have a jury system.
Right.
It's amazing when you put 12 people together, common sense people from all different backgrounds. They will generally, almost always, arrive at the correct conclusion. That's the beauty of the system.
Right.
And I think the common sense of the common person is highly underestimated.
So let's talk about some of the specifics in your career, because you have covered some of the biggest things that our country has seen. Saddam Hussein. We have to talk about 9/11 and how you were able to do that. I was not in the media when September 11, when 9/11 happened, and I can't imagine how you even as an American, you're internalizing what you're watching, but at the same time, you've got a job of bringing the news to the people.
That was tough.
How do you do that?
That was tough. Those were really tough days. And then we went to New York,
Yes.
right afterwards.
Yeah.
By extension, covering the Diamondbacks in the World Series.
Right.
So we were at ground zero weeks after it happened, and it was still smoldering.
Were you with the team when they visited ground zero? The D-backs?
No. That was a closed deal, to my knowledge.
Okay,
I recall it being it was going to be a somber thing for them to go.
Because we talked with Luis Gonzalez.
I don't think, there may have been a pool there,
Okay.
but I don't recall that.
But you weren't there with them?
No.
What was that? I want to stick on 9/11, but for me, when Sandy Hook Elementary School, when that mass shooting happened, I was getting ready to go on the air that day. I was in the newsroom and preparing for the show. We had heard there was a shooting, then we heard it involved children, and then the body count kept going up. And I actually reached out to a friend in talk radio, to Glenn Beck.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, how do I go on the air for 4 hours or 3 hours and make any sense out of this? How do I even talk? I mean, I was lost. In that sense, how do you...
What did he tell you, Mike? I'm curious.
He said you just have to be honest with your feelings. Tell them how you're feeling. And share with them that the way they're feeling angry and sad, share that with them.
Yeah.
It's different for me.
It's a good instinct.
But the difference is, in my job, I'm hired to give my opinion. I am there to talk about my opinions about what I'm seeing. You have a different responsibility. How do you convey that, but still stick to those journalistic principles?
I think in that one, it's actually easy because the gun debate will come later.
Mm-hmm.
But in the moment, it's a loss of life, of young life. Mm-hmm. And everyone has a commonality on that it's incredibly senseless and tragic.
Sure.
And sad. You start from there. And everybody's feeling that. The gun debate will happen later, and you know it will happen. And it did.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And it didn't take long. And it's taking less and less time when these events happen. But in the moment of that one is probably easier to find common ground because everybody's in the same place as a human being.
Yeah, the sadness and outrage that everyone feels, but for me it's the disbelief. I think that's what I couldn't get away from, because there's a way to connect sometimes with what you're seeing. But I can't even imagine the absence of emotion that you could have to level a firearm at a child. I couldn't even get myself there.
No, I know. A few people can possibly understand that.
It's unimaginable.
That's interesting that had that effect on you, because the one that kind of blew my mind was Columbine.
Yeah.
And I thought we'd hit the pinnacle of tragedy with Columbine.
And that was way before my time in the media.
Until 9/11 happened.
Yes. So when you looked at 9/11, when you saw that happen and knew that you were going to have to try to make some kind of sense out of your broadcast, what does that do? How do you do that?
You have to plow ahead, and I think it's okay to show some emotion. I think if you're void of emotion, people wonder, well, what the heck is up with this guy? Mm-hmm. Does he not feel any of this stuff? Mm-hmm. I think it's okay. It's okay.
When you go look back at 9/11, and you were telling a story before we came in here about Shanksville, can you talk? What was it about Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that was so moving to you?
Well, they had the recordings of people on board the flight, mm-hmm. So that was played in the main complex. You could listen to these conversations, and it's amazing, when you talk about death, that people on the verge of death, often there is a calmness. These people were very calm. I just couldn't believe it. They were very calm, calling loved ones, knowing they were going down.
I talked to a wife whose husband was on a flight. I had her on the air once, and on one of our 9/11 shows, and talking about having to explain to her husband, because they didn't know, that other planes had gone into buildings, and that this plane was probably destined for a building.
Exactly. And
then they make the decision that they're going to go and take over the plane no matter what happens. It's
incredibly brave. I don't think they had a lot of options. And I think smart people on that plane said, look, this is what's going to happen to us. We have a couple of choices. We can either just sit here and ride it down, or we can try to take control of the plane. And they made the right choice.
Yeah, and if they ride it down, they know that other people's lives, they're dying
right.
anyway.
That's right.
But that's still...
it's heavy.
You know, if you watch the videos and the documentaries of Ground Zero, of the towers, the people that made the choice to jump as opposed to burn, and you think,
I know.
Who can imagine making those choices?
Well, to see a perfectly operating airplane fly into a building willingly, it's so incongruous. When I still see that video, I can't actually process it.
We all live in proximity to Sky Harbor, where we are and where you guys are. We're used to the sounds of those jets flying at a fairly low level. That noise before that impact of the jet, and how fast you could see how quickly it was going.
Oh, he was pushing the throttle.
He was
accelerating for maximum effect.
Yeah.
It was crude, but from the Al-Qaeda point of view, incredibly effective for a really crude weapon. And, bin Laden said afterwards, I kind of like the Japanese said after Pearl Harbor, I think we've probably awakened these guys, and it may not be pleasant.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing.
It was horrific, the whole thing. And being down there, in Battery Park with all of the pictures of the missing and candles. This is, again, 4 weeks later. It was, man, I still haven't gotten over it.
Me either. And I have friends that here in Arizona that live here now that are directly connected to 9/11. My friend McAvoy, his brother was a firefighter with Ladder 3 in Lower Manhattan. As a matter of fact, it's their fire truck that's inside the museum now.
Oh, I've seen it.
So yeah, his brother was one of the firefighters,
Wow.
and his best friend was working in the towers as a trader with Cantor Fitzgerald. So he lost 2 people that day and watched the buildings come down from his office in Brooklyn. And we talk about it every year on 9/11. Another friend of mine that's a builder here in town was a firefighter that had retired before 9/11 happened, but immediately went back and spent 12 days doing search and rescue on the rubble in the days that followed.
That was tough. We did a lot of stories on that when we were there, and there was it was really tough on those people because they weren't finding any survivors at all. So it was really grim down there, and everybody was beat down because there was no good news, and they knew after a couple of weeks there wasn't going to be any good news. There was no chance of anybody surviving that.
It was the first time in my life where I didn't feel safe, where I thought I agree with that. This must be how the Israelis feel. This must be what it's to be live in one of these countries where people walk into a Starbucks and blow themselves up or get on a bus. We didn't know what was going to happen next. The flights were shut down. What was going to happen on subway trains and public buses? And there were stories of Greyhound buses being pulled over because they had someone suspicious on a bus. We had no idea what was going to happen next.
I felt that too. I got a text that morning. Turn on your TV. That's all. It was a pager at the time. A little pager.
Yeah.
It was beeping early in the morning.
Yeah.
Turn on your TV. That was from my news director, Doug Bannard. And when I'm watching this, all I caught on the banner, I'm looking at the smoking buildings and it says America under attack.
Wow.
My instant reaction was to go to the window looking, I'm not kidding, looking for incoming missiles.
Yeah.
I didn't know, I had not, at that point, we didn't know Al-Qaeda. I didn't know who's attacking us, who launched. I thought it was a missile attack when I first saw the image. Then they're replaying and showing stuff, and I'm like, oh, a plane hit the building.
Yeah.
But at first, I went to the window. I'm like, do we have missiles incoming?
Right.
That was my first reaction.
My mother called me from Florida and said, "Are you watching this?" And I said, "Watching what?" She said, "Turn on the TV."
Yeah.
I said, "What channel?" She said, "Any channel." And I saw the second tower get hit. The reason why I bring these stories up is because you have to looking at your career and what you've done, do you realize the significance that your job, your role plays in that information that it brings people together. Do you feel that, or do you not feel it?
I want to feel that. I want that to happen, and that's my goal every time I go on the air, is to try to find some commonality with people. And that can be through humor or whatever it is, to try to create some bond. Otherwise, people can just get everything off of the phone.
Right.
So there's got to be some kind of relationship there. And I feel like there is a relationship with the people who watch.
Well, and one of the things, and I'm not just saying this because you're sitting here, but I watch how all of you work together. And I think you come across, because it's a weird position. I can be a goofball on the radio. I mean, it's just, it's one thing. You have a serious job to deliver news. They have an expectation, but they also want to feel like they know you. And everybody on that show has such a unique personality, and their ability to come across. Corey McCloskey,
he's unbelievable.
He is, but he makes you feel like you know him, and you can't wait to hear what he's going to say next.
He has been a lot of fun.
But the way you guys interact, you don't play the straight-laced.
No,
you know what I mean?
That's boring.
There's a piece of you that come out in this as well.
Good.
Don't you think?
Well, it's human. I mean, I think I've told somebody before. I've got a Fitbit on my wrist. And I tried it one night, and during a newscast, literally my heart rate was no higher out there than it is when I'm at home. That's how comfortable I feel on that set. That set is part of my world. And so I really feel, I know that I'm on the air, but I kind of forget a lot of times. And I think we're just kind of all hanging out with the guys behind the camera, and that it's kind of a little... I don't know how to explain.
Is that the goal?
I think it's become the goal. It's not really a goal. It's just how it feels. It feels like we're just all hanging out doing this, which we do every day, and it's just very natural. I don't know how else to put it. Corey would say these things, and I would crack up whether we were on the air or not.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
But also then, the addition, Christina Carrilla comes into the show.
Incredible. She's like my older daughter.
She is amazing. But is that a new role for you? That's exactly where I was going, because you're not the same age.
No.
You're a little bit more of the mentor now.
Oh, well, I'm definitely older than her. I'm twice her age.
Okay. But she is so professional, and again, the rapport seems to be the natural rapport between you.
Well, I adore her, first of all. I mean, she's
terrific.
She's a great person. You've gotten to know her.
Well, she worked in my hometown for a while. She worked in Fort Myers. Right. So we had some common...
And you probably saw her when you go back and visit.
Right, exactly.
She grew up in the performance world.
Right.
So she was on stage
I heard her sing on Instagram. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. She's a classically trained soprano. So she's, I'll put it this way. She's incredible just as a human being. But when the light goes on, she is ready for business. Mm-hmm. And that's the performer in her. That's part of her DNA. Not in a bad way.
No.
She is ready to go. She's ready to do her job. She's prepared. She's ready to go. And she's been a real pleasure to be around.
So let's talk about some of the other things. 12 presidential nominations, conventions.
Yeah.
6 presidential elections.
Mm-hmm.
How has it changed?
The angst over these elections has changed, and I think it changed in 2000 with Gore v. Bush, or Bush v. Gore. That was, I think, a real change, because it ended up in the Supreme Court, came down to Florida in 300 some odd votes.
Thanks to my home state.
Hanging chads and dimpled chads. And we went through an odyssey where, again, the popular vote was thwarted by the Electoral College vote. Mm-hmm. And by the way, to Al Gore's credit, he gracefully backed away when it was over. Mm-hmm. That's a way, I think that's a template of how to handle it. He handled it gracefully. Nixon handled it gracefully in 60. He had real issues with that campaign, too. After that, I think there were people saying it then, Bush is an illegitimate president. You remember all this.
Absolutely. I was living in Florida then. I had just moved here, but my family was still living in Florida.
I think that started the divide, where elections were questioned, people started thinking, is this whole thing on the up and up? Mm-hmm. Gore got robbed, this kind of stuff. And then it's just carried over. It has carried over almost every election since. People don't like the result, they challenge the result and say that it's illegitimate.
I was asked to be a volunteer on the Bush campaign in 2004. After my brother was killed in 2003. And so I was traveling to events around the country, and I've done a couple of events with the president during his re-election campaign. And I thought then that I would never see that level of vitriol in my life.
Isn't that incredible?
And then I went to the convention when Romney was nominated in Tampa,
right.
And then I was at the convention in Cleveland when Trump got the nomination. And we just keep looking, or I just keep looking at it wondering, it can't get any worse. And we just seem to be on this path that we seem to be so much more divided.
I know.
How do you do your job and deal with that? Because mine is pick a side.
You just got to play it straight. You got to play it straight with the audience. Try to be as fair as you can. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to tip one way or the other. You just try to be fair with the people you interview, the stories you cover. Try to present or allow each side to present their best argument and let the best argument win the day. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem that difficult to me. I keep going back to this idea as a role of a judge.
Yeah.
Judges can and should, and for the most part do, park whatever BS they've got going on internally about how they view the world. And they generally can rise above that and try to be a fair arbiter of the law. That's their job. I feel like we're in the same boat.
But I think a judge has to love the law more than their opinion to make that happen. You have to love journalism more than you love your own opinion.
I do.
Because the day that that's not the case anymore, you're going to come steal my job.
No, exactly. Well, that won't happen. But you go into the opinion side. And
Sure.
The problem now is, and we're all guilty of it, we've all been revealed a little bit on social media,
Sure.
Either a little bit or a lot, because our companies encouraged us to go on social media. When that started to really blossom and become a platform, the suits, I would say, felt, well, we got to get these people out there and on that because that's going to mean viewers. That's going to mean reach. Get them out there. Mm-hmm. Well, now you've got people opining about all kinds of stuff, and you
Sure.
pretty much figure out where they're coming from.
Well, I try to be fair. I mean, I try to give equal time. I try to give both sides. I'm not required to. It's not part of my
Right.
job description. But yours is.
Yes.
You giving up the if you aren't giving off the idea of what you're saying, that you're telling both sides of the story, you're failing at your job. That's not a failure in my industry.
Right. But I think you are fair on the air.
I try to be.
You are.
But I also can say, you know where I stand on this, but here's somebody else that disagrees.
Let's talk.
Let's talk.
That's getting lost. The ability now to talk is I mean, there are subjects now that you really can't bring up at the dinner table because
Right.
it's going to cause World War III.
It's interesting because I find myself now more than ever, and I've been doing this now for almost 20 years full time. I find myself in public now more concerned when people figure out who I am because of the level of vitriol. That normally it's a polite conversation. I have not had a bad interaction yet, but I'm not going to be surprised when it happens, when somebody that just despises my opinion speaks out.
I have not had, with the exception of one incident, I have not had that problem. People have been really, really nice. And I think the people who disagree with you or think you're on Fox, they hate you just for that, they may not approach you anyway.
But don't you think that
But people generally have been incredibly kind and warm.
I think there's a level of ignorance in it, because anybody that watches you and what your team, everybody, it's hard to argue that you're not fair. You can talk about the Fox label and say that you're associated with that, so therefore you're whatever they assume that is. But
they assume we're corporate controlled, and we're not.
No.
We have, and I say this on social media to people, and I don't think they believe it. And this is a God's honest truth. They have never, and I've been there a long time, since it started, since Fox started, They have never once come into our newsroom or called in or said, we're going to do this. Like it or lump it. Never. Not once. They imprint no editorial discretion over what we do.
I had this discussion.
They let us run.
Well, I had this discussion.
And I'm going to tell you, by the way, our newsroom, I would say, is probably 85% left-leaning. This is just the world of journalism.
Right.
Okay? So this idea that we're somehow over on the extreme right is absolute nonsense. Nonsense.
Yeah. I had with a guest I won't name on the air the discussion about I was told that my bosses won't let me tell the truth. I've had that discussion.
It's your show.
It's my show.
It's your mouth. It's your brain.
But you know that it's happened to you. People assume.
They see that brand. Listen, the Fox brand to the left, to a lot of the left, not always, is a toxic thing. You mentioned the conventions. I learned a trick pretty early on that at the Democratic National Conventions that I've covered, we take the Fox labeling off our microphone and off our camera. Because that is immediately like the devil seeing the cross.
Yeah.
I don't want that to be a repellent to people I need to interview.
Do you think...
I'm sad to say that, but we take the labels off our stuff at the Democratic Convention.
And I don't want to drag you into a political opinion. I'm doing my best to just leave some of this alone.
I appreciate that.
But do you think that the Fox brand did a lot of that to themselves with the Dominion lawsuit and the messages that came out about one thing being said behind the scenes in text messages and another thing being broadcast over the air?
It certainly didn't help. I mean, I think that's why it didn't go to trial. I think there was a lot of embarrassing stuff there that the company did not want out, I'm sure.
But do you think that furthered that reputation of the far-right firebrand? Like you said, people just don't like it.
Yeah, but in the background, what you're seeing among a lot of these hosts is that they had questions.
Right.
Right? So it actually revealed some of these hosts to be a little more maybe centrist than people might have thought, given what they look at on TV.
But doesn't it lend itself to the label that you are a corporate shill and you're saying what you're being told to be said?
Yeah, and again, remember, we're a station group owned by Fox.
I agree.
We are not part of that.
But the general public...
They don't know that.
Right.
The Fox News Channel is its own entity. There's no question it's right of center. We'll debate over how far right of center it is. And I think you can safely say the other networks are left of center. Yeah. All the rest are over on the left to varying degrees.
Yeah.
I got to be honest with you. I really miss the old CNN.
Me too.
I pine for that. Even going back to 9/11, I think I turned on CNN first. I don't think Fox News Channel was on. They might have been on the air. I'm not sure.
I don't remember.
I turned on CNN reflexively and still do on breaking news because of that just built-in wiring.
And how good they've been at breaking news for...
And they've got a lot of correspondence. So they've got a lot of ground covered. You know that they're going to be in the places where things are happening. Mm-hmm. So I reflexively still tune it in. And I miss that, where I felt like I could get a pretty fair, down the middle, agnostic news presentation. I miss it.
Yeah. Being able to do that without being robotic is the difficulty. The good people like you, the people that are able to do the job so well, are the ones that can show a human side of things and be fair at the same time. Don't you think?
Well, that's what I kind of strive for. I mean, I'm not. I don't mean it to sound like I'm in a conscious state of thinking about that, because I'm not. But I've done this long enough, and I've done enough talk radio that I kind of know where the line is for the job I'm in.
Do you like doing talk radio?
I can only push so far. I love talk radio. It's total freedom.
It is.
It's total freedom.
Yeah, I tell people it's an amazing gig. It's so much fun what I get to do, and the incredible people that I've met and things I've done. For you, I'm more
constrained. I cannot venture into opinion very much. I'll take on things on the air like photo radar, which I have been very public about that I don't like.
I hate it.
I don't like it. I probably should keep my yap shut about that, but it really gets under my skin because I think it's overreach. I think it's pestering generally good people out there.
I think it's a money grab.
Well, I think that too. But again, that's an issue that I think is about a 70-30.
Yeah.
70% don't like it. There's maybe 30% who like Big Brother. I don't.
Right.
I bristle at that whole idea. So I'll take that on in a funny way, try to laugh about it, poke fun at them. But I think that's kind of benign. It's not a really political deep dive.
Yeah.
It's just an irritation.
And that's for me. I was laughing. I said, for anybody that thinks that it's not a money grab, let me explain why I think it is. That if you're driving down Tatum Boulevard and where it turns into 44th Street, that last section where you're going west, where it's still Paradise Valley, they have a van there many times, a photo radar van. So if it's not a money grab, why are they going to get you on the way out of Paradise Valley?
Of course.
Why wouldn't you put it on the other side of the street and get you on the way into Paradise Valley?
I don't arrive at these opinions just kind of blindly.
Right.
I did a pretty deep dive on Scottsdale's photo radar program and looked at the data of where they were putting the trucks.
Yeah.
And the expectation was, and they told me, we are doing this to lessen accidents. I don't want to throw Scottsdale under the bus, but it's a great example. So I crunched the data. And the speed cameras were not in high accident locations. Quite the opposite. They were on stretches of Indian School where you can get up to speed. They knew it. They figured it out. And they started putting the vans at places where people would hit the accelerator. Which, by the way, traffic engineers I interviewed told me if you put no speed limit signs on the road, again, this is trusting people generally. The public will kind of figure out what's the reasonable and prudent speed. They will intuitively figure out what is the appropriate speed for this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny we agree on
once I crunched the numbers and I saw what was going on, I'm like, this isn't really about safety.
Right. It's about revenue.
It's about revenue.
Yeah. So I want to go back to some of the people you've talked to. I asked you who are some of the people and you said musicians, but can you think of some of the interviews of people, my conversations with George W. Bush, I didn't get to interview him. But a conversation with the President of the United States to me was significant. I was invited to be a guest at a State of the Union address. Yeah. Which I had never been to, and I sat in the gallery, and it was when Barack Obama was president. And I've said before, didn't agree with anything he said in the speech. But to watch the Americanism of the entire government coming together, the pageantry of it, and taking in that experience was one of the most patriotic things I've ever done.
Wow.
Are there moments for you when you look at it and you think, I can't believe where I started, that this is where I am?
No, all the time.
Like,
all the time.
Give me some examples, or an example.
I'll give you one. You talk about being in the chamber. When Clinton was impeached, I covered that. We also had a flare-up with missiles in Iraq during that, if you remember.
Yes.
Which people thought it was Wag the Dog and all of that. So we were in Washington for that.
This was the aspirin factory thing they called it.
Exactly. Yeah. And this was one of those cases where I thought, man, I was kind of disappointed in my fellow journalists. The day that Clinton was impeached in the U.S. Senate, he was acquitted in the U.S. Senate. He was impeached in the House, acquitted in a trial in the Senate.
Right.
When that vote happened, it was a Saturday morning. It was fairly early. And I rushed down there to get a credential to be in the gallery for that. And I'm trying to remember the guy from NBC. When I got in there, Chip Reed.
Okay.
It was me and Chip Reed sitting together, and all the other journalists were watching it on TV. And I thought, are you kidding? I've got the ticket. It's the impeachment trial of William Jefferson Clinton. I've got the ticket from the day he was acquitted. I thought, you are not going to go into this chamber and witness history, which at that time, impeachments were very rare. You had to go back to Andrew Johnson, right?
Yeah.
Before we got into the impeachment of everybody.
Sure.
I'm like, I'm not missing this. Are you kidding? That's the privilege of this job, to be able to witness history and be right there. I wasn't going to miss that for the world, but I was shocked at how many journalists sat in the pool room and watched it.
I still have all of my credentials from the conventions.
Yeah, same.
And then that thing of states trading pins where they pin them on.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of pins from different states and some of the Arizona pins. For me, it's still unbelievable for me that I would be put in that position where I'd ever.
I agree.
And those are just.
It's an honor.
Yeah, it is. It is an honor. And do you still feel that?
Oh, yeah.
With your job?
No doubt. No
do you
doubt.
think you'll be done when you don't? Like if you all of a sudden don't, that you're one of those people that says, I'll just watch it on TV. Is that when it's time for you to hang it up?
I think so. Yeah. I still love it. I still love it. And I'm obviously much closer to the end of my career than the beginning. And that's an interesting discussion about what I'm going to do next, because that is coming and I don't want to overstay my welcome. I really don't.
Do you know what that's going to look like?
I have no idea, Mike. I'm so involved day to day in what I'm doing that I haven't had a lot of time to ponder what comes next.
Do you have an idea?
And that's a mistake, by the way, I think.
When you say you don't want to overstay your welcome, do you have any idea what that will look like? When you look at it and say, it's time to go. Do you know what that's going to look like?
I really don't. It's hard to kind of wrap my mind around that, because this has been so much of my life for so much of my life that I think it's hard to kind of go there when you're not actually. It's still a ways off, but it's coming. So I've got to really start to think about it.
When you. Because I look at, I've been in Arizona since 1995. I look at the people that have been around forever, and the Tim and Willies of radio, the people that I've gotten to know.
Yeah.
One of the people we talked about on the broadcast is W. Stephen Martin. His years on radio in Phoenix.
Incredible.
In this building, Pat McMahon for what he was me to talk radio. But I've also had conversations with Al McCoy. You talk about a legend in that business. We asked you to be on this podcast because I would put you in that category of your but your longevity here in the Valley, not just longevity, but success in it. But you are not just a recognizable figure, but a reliable figure. People, when you said you instinctively turn on CNN, when news is happening in town, I instinctively turn on you guys.
Wow, that's nice. Well, that is reflected in the ratings, which is nice to see. On big news events, we do extremely well. So I think, and again, this is a continuity of a lot of people. Linda Williams.
Amazing.
Yeah, incredible. You talk about somebody who can't go out in public without really being recognized and loved. She's at the top of the heap.
She is.
Jude retired just recently, but Jude was. We've kept a lot of really good people for a long period of time, and that's the stability of that place. It's just a great group of people.
So you said you have no idea what you're going to do next. You talked about writing a book, and just a couple of wrap-up questions. Are you going to write another one?
Yeah, I think I will. I've actually got. It's crazy. I've got a children's book kind of on the back burner that I'm kicking.
That's amazing.
Around. Yeah.
What motivated that?
It was a story told to me by a colleague, and I said that would make an incredible children's story, and it has to do with an animal and a relationship, and I thought that is gold.
Like a Charlotte's Web, or?
It's hard to explain.
Okay.
But it's a cool story. It's an incredible story, actually.
I love the diversity. I love radio. I love what I've done. The ability I've gotten to do some TV. I love that different medium. This is an incredible opportunity for me.
This is cool. This is really cool.
But writing a book and having somebody that wrote it with me, but for me, it was a personal book. It was cathartic. The way we did it was I had somebody had a ghostwriter. Well, everybody knows who she is, but we would talk like we were talking.
She'd record it?
Yeah, she'd record it, transcribe it into written form, and then she put it in book form. And she would ask me stories about my life and stories about things that were important to me. And I remember there were times when I would tear up telling some of the stories. So it was, for me, the experience for me was more important than if I sold one book.
Oh, that's the same for me. I talked to my dad about this. He's 98 years old, World War II veteran.
Wow.
Was a pilot in the Navy in World War II. Incredible guy. I owe everything that I've done to him. He's just been an incredible guiding force. His advice is so dead on. He's never steered me wrong, honestly. Never. He told me, he said, look, he said, don't worry about how the book does. He said, you are a published author, and that's just something else that you can put down on the resume, and it's another thing you check a box and go, I've done it.
That's what they said about me, to me.
He said, that's a great accomplishment.
It
and
is.
He said, don't
amazing.
be consumed or worried about the sales. That's immaterial, really. The whole process of doing it, bringing it to print, bringing it to the marketplace, getting it out there. He said, that's the... He talks a lot about the journey, not the destination. Mm-hmm. So true. It's so true.
So since you brought that up, I didn't know that about your father. Have you been to Normandy?
Yes,
you been?
Went with him to
with
Normandy.
Him.
My brother and I went with him to Normandy.
I've been on the anniversary of D-Day.
Oh, you told me that. Yes.
What was that experience to go with your father?
Overwhelming, and looking at the cliffs down to Normandy Beach, and that's only one of a couple of theaters. Pointe du Hoc. And we walked down there. First of all, I expected, I don't know why I thought this, that there would be some, other than the pillboxes on the top.
Right.
I thought there'd be more stuff in the water. I thought there might even be some of the iron crosses out there that they tried to gut ships that were coming in.
Omaha Beach, Utah Beach. Yeah.
There was a skeleton of a cement boat out there somewhere. Do you remember seeing that?
I don't.
That was about it. Everybody was out there walking their dog, sunbathing, not going in the water. It's cold.
It's cold.
I thought I would see more of that, and I didn't. I was that shocked me. But the biggest takeaway was looking down there thinking, those guys down there were going to scale these cliffs and take these guys over.
Right.
On their home turf.
And it was next
which
man up.
Which France had become their home turf.
Yeah, when it was next man up. When somebody would be taken off those ladders, the next guy started climbing.
It's unbelievable. I think Steven Spielberg captured it perfectly.
Did you go to the American Cemetery in Normandy?
You're talking about the White Crosses.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Did you walk through the museum?
Yes.
So what struck me about that was you go through and see all of these videos. Some of them were actual videos of them storming the beach.
Right.
And soldiers being hit as they hit the beach with gunfire and then getting up and still continuing to try to move forward. And you see all of this sacrifice and death and the sign at the doors that walk out to the cemetery was a quote from an American general that said, "All we ask for is enough land to bury our gallant dead." And then the doors open, and all you can see are white crosses and stars of David.
Yes.
It is... I look at that generation and I think about that sacrifice where if you weren't at war fighting, you were here sacrificing, women going to work, the rationing of goods and services. Right. And I never want a crisis that bad to unify America like that did. 9/11 may have done it for our generation, but sometimes I wonder what will it take to us to realize we're all in this together like that generation did.
I have a thought about that. This is a little off the rails.
Okay.
But I am growing suspicious about the government talking a lot about UFOs lately. Mm-hmm. In the last 5 years, this has gone from taboo subject to front page. Mm-hmm. You are no longer a nutcase if you start to discuss this issue.
Right.
And for us to think and be so arrogant that some other world that may be millions of years ahead of us hasn't figured out other forms of travel that we can't even comprehend, I think is naive. I'm not saying we're being visited, but if you want one galvanizing thing that would happen that might unify the world, that might be it.
Yeah, that's I hadn't put those two together.
I hate to think about it because you hope it's not hostile.
But that is an incredible...
I've thought about this. What would be the one thing that would bring humanity to a common place? That might do it.
Do you believe that is happening?
I don't know, but I would, as a journalist, I think you're foolish and naive and arrogant to close the book on that and say that's not possible.
And it's interesting you say that.
We don't know that.
No.
How do we know it's not possible?
But if you had said that 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
I think I've said it.
You have?
I think I said it on talk radio, actually.
Okay.
I've been thinking about this a long time. I'm like, the government, and the thing that's making me suspicious is the government, are they softening the battlefield, so to speak, for contact?
Mm-hmm.
Do they want us not panicked if and when that happens? So they're starting to open it up so that we're used to the idea. It's not going to come out of left field if we find out there has been some kind of contact.
It's like the how terrified they were in the movie Signs. That, and I don't want to go down the road of Hollywood, but
I know, but mass panic. It makes me wonder why the government is suddenly flinging the door open on this. What are they doing? Why are they doing it?
Are they doing it in other places, or is it just the U.S.?
I don't know. I'm not sure what's happening in
Europe
Russia, or I think, again, you look at a map of where these sightings have happened, it's predominantly the United States. So either we've got great imaginations or something's going on. I don't know. But I'm just saying I would never close the book on that and say, nah, that's not possible.
Right, me either.
Despite the fact we're talking about the light years away, that anything we know of that could sustain life is really unfathomable, that they couldn't possibly get here. Well, not in the way we view travel, no.
Right. Right.
I don't know. I don't know, and I would never shut the door on that. I think it would be ignorant to do that.
Yeah, I do too. I've never been, it's not something that I've thought as much about as you, but I've never closed the door on any of it either.
That's an open mind.
Right. Yeah, I just haven't gone that deep in thought about what if. But on the topic of what would unify us, that's a great point, is what is it would, the tragedy of 9/11, just to go back to that for a moment, to further your point, if you remember in the days that followed 9/11, George W. Bush got a standing ovation by both parties in Congress in his speech, and then the entire United States Congress stood on the steps of the Capitol and sang "God Bless America."
It's hard to believe that would happen.
But it took an event.
I think it would happen again if something like that happened.
That's the problem for me, is how do we get that back without it being a crisis or a tragedy that makes it happen?
I don't know.
But do you think it's possible?
I think anything's possible. I'm an eternal optimist, by the way. I always think things are going to get better. That's just my DNA. I think just being alive, being here at this time in the world is really an incredible gift. I mean, we're richer, we're healthier, we live longer. We have problems, but every society has had problems through the history of mankind. So we're not in some kind of unique place, and we're certainly better off than we were in the Civil War.
Sure.
So there's always, there has to be some perspective.
So your kids are young adults. Is this the world you want them to have?
Not exactly, no. And I think social media has been a really detrimental thing. And my kids have said this to me. They've said, I think we're going to look back on this as being profoundly negative for kids' mental health, that it's been a real negative.
So do you think, so let's say your children, the generation that now is having the children of the next generation, are they the ones that are going to change this because it damaged them?
I think we're all waking up to the downside
I agree.
of this.
But will they, growing up with those devices in their hands, will they be the ones to change, whether it's a, not necessarily a legal change, but you vote with your wallet.
Right.
If they're not supporting this stuff financially, do those things go away?
Yeah, I think we'll figure out how to manage this in a reasonable way. I hope so.
Yeah, I do too.
Because we've been taken away by it.
So this happens when we go to lunch. We end up talking for a lot longer than we intended.
No, I loved it. Thank you.
I love talking with you. I really do. I enjoy the conversation. I appreciate you doing this. And I just wanted people to get to know you a little better, because when I got to know you, there's always more I want to learn. And I just think that's what makes you so good at what you do.
I appreciate that, Mike. And I feel the same way. Our friendship, I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Goodbye.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
All right, that's another edition in the can.